Alright, so this is part 2 of the greatest NBA teams of all time tier list. If you didn't watch part 1, it'll be right at the top of the screen, but without further ado, let's get started. Now for the 1982-1983 Philadelphia 76ers Sub-GOAT Championship team. This team went 12-1 inside the NBA playoffs. That was probably their biggest feat on the stat sheet in my opinion, but this team was very stacked with stars. They had pretty good depth too. They had really good depth inside their starting lineup. They didn't really have a great end of the bench, but then again, you don't really use your end of the bench inside the playoffs. That's why they went 12-1. But they had a very good regular season record as well, going 65-17. Now for the 1983-1984 Boston Celtics, gonna go elite championship teams again. Didn't make a massive jump from the 81-82 season in my opinion, so I'm good with them there. Now for the 1984-1985 Los Angeles Lakers, I'm gonna go ahead and put them in the sub-GOAT championship teams. This was debatably their prime team. They just had so many good players, it was ridiculous. James Worthy, Byron Scott, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, Magic Johnson, Michael Cooper, Kurt Rambis, Jamal Wilkes, who was getting up there in age, but he was still a bucket in my opinion, Bob McAdoo. This team was really fucking good, and they deserve to be on that second tier. For the 85-86 Boston Celtics, this was the prime of that dynasty, GOAT championship teams. There were not many, if any, teams better than this team. This is a team that had a 9.2 net rating inside the regular season and a 10.4 net rating inside the playoffs. They went 67-15 in the regular season and 15-3 in the playoffs. This team was star-studded. They had pretty good depth, not compared to the Lakers, but they did have that knock with the star power over them slightly, and this team was just absolutely unstoppable at the time. Now we're going to go back to back here with the 86-87 Lakers. This was the prime of their careers. GOAT championship teams. Same song and dance with the 1985-1986 Boston Celtics. This is a team that had a 9.1 net rating inside the regular season and an 11.3 net rating inside the playoffs. They went 15-3 in the playoffs, and they had a regular season record of 65-17. This team was absolutely insane. And although Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, who as we know is debatably the greatest player of all time, although he was on his downturn of his career, this was the deepest the team was ever. And of course they had James Worthy, who is at this point the superstar, and of course Magic Johnson, who had been a superstar for a while. I guess same goes with James Worthy. But they had so many good role players, from Michael Cooper to Byron Scott. Those guys were just absolutely insane this season. Now for my boys, the bad boys. I wouldn't really call them my boys. I'm not a Pistons fan, but you know, I did like the bad boy Pistons teams. So they are going inside the elite championship team. Both of them actually. I may as well go both of them right now. Both of their seasons were very similar. They were basically the same team with, you know, slight differences in both. But I mean, for the 88-89 team, 6.1 net rating in the regular season, 8.7 net rating inside the playoffs. They went 15-2 in the playoffs, and they swept in the finals versus the Los Angeles Lakers. This is a team that had great depth and pretty good star power as well. Exact same goes with the 1989-1990 Detroit Pistons. They did lose a little bit of depth, but they still steamrolled through the playoffs with a 15-5 record. Now for the double three-peat Bulls. We're going to start off with, obviously, with the 1990-1991 Chicago Bulls. Elite championship teams. This is Michael Jordan's prime, and he won, of course, his first championship ever. Scottie Pippen was not an all-star this season. He was the only technically all-star in the entire roster, but he was really that good to lead this team to that good of a record, being 61-21, and of course the NBA championship. Same song and dance with the 1991-1992 Chicago Bulls. I don't really need an explanation for there. Now the 1992-1993 Chicago Bulls, that was a slight step back in my opinion, sub-elite championship team. Three-peats take a large toll on your body, so I don't blame them for only being a 57-win team this season, because they were probably really fucking gassed, and three-peating alone takes a lot of effort and a lot of stamina to do, but this team just wasn't quite as good as the previous two teams. Now, of course, as Michael Jordan retired, there was a little opening, and the Houston Rockets took that opportunity and won 2 championships. They weren't that good of a team to really be on this list, so I kind of left them off. But we have the 1995-1996 Chicago Bulls, and do I really need to do any explaining? I mean, come on. This is what most people consider the greatest team of all time, and I have absolutely nothing against that. This is a team that had a 13.4 net rating inside the regular season and a 12.1 net rating inside the playoffs. They went 72-10 in the season. That's of course the second greatest regular season record of all time, behind the 73-9 Warriors. And they went 15-3 inside the playoffs. This was the prime of that dynasty, and this team absolutely ran the league this season, and I guess the following 2 seasons. With the next season, we have another Chicago Bulls team. Obviously, this team was very similar to the previous, but definitely sub-GOAT championship teams. I can't really put them inside the GOAT championship teams. They just weren't as good as that 95-96 Bulls team, but they were still absolutely outstanding. Now for the last year of Michael Jordan's career, we have the 1997-1998 Chicago Bulls, elite championship teams. Well, it was not, you know what I mean. But this is when their core players started getting old, Dennis Rodman, Scottie Pippen, and Michael Jordan, and basically their entire roster was starting to get up there in age, so they just weren't what they used to be. But still, obviously, one of the greatest teams to ever play. Now for the 1999-2000 Los Angeles Lakers, sub-elite championship teams. This team is absolutely amazing. They didn't have the depth that a lot of the teams above them did, but they of course had the 2 stars in prime Shaq and up-and-coming Kobe, so I'm good with putting them there. Now for the 2000-2001 and 2001-2002 Lakers, I'm fine putting them both together, both inside the ultra high tier championship teams. Alright, so as a wee bit retarded in putting the 2000-2001 Lakers in the ultra high tier championship teams, the stats speak for themselves. Definitely a sub-elite championship teams. For the final result, it'll be fixed, don't worry. Weren't quite as good as the 1999-2000 Los Angeles Lakers in my opinion. I just don't think that they had the depth that team did, and they still kind of had the same star power, because although Kobe was getting better as his career went on, Shaq was getting slightly worse, so it kind of evened it out. Now for the 2002-2003 San Antonio Spurs. This is the season where David Robertson retired, obviously on the championship, sub-elite championship teams. This team was pretty similar to the 1999-2000 Los Angeles Lakers in the case where it didn't have supreme depth or anything, especially like the later San Antonio teams, but of course they had David Robinson, who was on the tail end of his career. Well, it was his last season, so obviously it was the tail end of his career, but of course they had Tim Duncan, who was just absolutely insane this season. Now for the 2004-2005 San Antonio Spurs. This was really Tim Duncan's prime, and this is when Manu Ginobili and Tony Parker were becoming stars. Elite championship team. This is, in a lot of people's opinion, the best team of all time, well, best San Antonio Spurs team of all time, because although the Spurs were mainly known as a playoff team with Greg Popovich obviously leading the way, this is a team that had a net rating of 8.7 in the regular season and 4.9 inside the playoffs, so pretty damn good, and they went 16-7 inside the 2005 NBA playoffs. Now next up, not sure why it's out of order here, but we have the 2006-2007 San Antonio Spurs. In my opinion, the best San Antonio Spurs team, well, pretty close to the 13-14 Spurs, but they're a pretty similar team to the 2004-2005 San Antonio Spurs, but they just had more depth inside their starting lineup as Tony Parker and Manu Ginobili kept getting better, but this team is obviously outstanding too, and basically, the same tier. Now for the 2007-2008 Boston Celtics, very, very good team. Elite championship team for sure. Are with any of the best teams on this list, but it's definitely better than a lot of the other teams. This team's starting lineup had absolutely no holes. You had Rajon Rondo, you had Ray Allen, you had Paul Pierce, you have Kevin Garnett, and you had Kendrick Perkins, who, he was a good player, come on, but he's basically a meme now. This team also had really good depth with guys like Eddie House, Tony Allen, James Posey, my boy, and Sam Cassell off the bench. So yeah, this team was really, really, really good. Now for the Miami Heat teams. First off, the 2011-2012 Miami Heat team. The worst of the two, they just didn't have the shooters or the depth that the 2012-2013 Miami Heat had. And of course, I think the better version of LeBron was the 2013 version. So I'm going to put this team inside the sub-elite championship teams. This is definitely more of a top-heavy team compared to the 2012-2013 Miami Heat, but their stars were absolutely amazing. Of course, Chris Bosh, Dwayne Wade, and LeBron James. And they did have some quality role players, but just not compared to the 2012-2013 Miami Heat. And speaking of the Devil, of course, they're next. And I'm going to go ahead and put them in the elite championship teams. That might feel like a bit of disrespect to most people, but I feel like I feel like most people would agree with me with that. You look at the top 2 tiers, and I just don't feel like this team is on par with those teams, but this team is obviously an all-time great team. They had an 8.6 net rating inside the regular season and a 7.3 net rating inside the playoffs. They went 16-7 in the playoffs, 66-16 regular season record, and they had very good depth, obviously, like I mentioned, very good star power, and of course Erik Spoelstra, who is proving himself right now inside the NBA, well, inside the conference finals and the conference semifinals to be, one of the better coaches of all time. Now for the 2013-2014 San Antonio Spurs, the big three, Tony Parker, Manu Ginobili, and Tim Duncan, they were on their downturn. They were getting older, except for Tony Parker, who is debatably, the best player on this team. But of course they had Super Kawhi, elite championship teams for sure. This team had the best depth out of any San Antonio Spurs team by far. And their stars were still stars. They were still Tim Duncan, Manu Ginobili, and Tony Parker, and they weren't just shell of themselves. They were still very good players. Now for the 2014-2015 Golden State Warriors sub-GOAT championship team. Now this team is of course one of those teams that just played absolutely amazing together, and we all know the dynasty that they had, or kind of are still having right now, but this is pre-Kevin Durant, as we know. This is pre-blow a 3-1 lead to LeBron and the Cavaliers, which we had them as the final team in this list, but definitely a sub-GOAT championship team in my opinion. And now we have the 2016-2017 Golden State Warriors, which is a GOAT championship team. I mean, this team was absolutely ridiculous. Like, hate on them all you want, but this is one of, if not the greatest team of all time. 11.6 net rating inside the regular season, 13.5 net rating inside the playoffs. They went 16-1 inside the playoffs. This team was ridiculous. And they still had, good veterans off the bench too, so it's not like they lost everything after clearing up cap space for Kevin Durant. For the second last team on this list, we have the 2017-2018 Golden State Warriors. Their veterans were getting older, so their bench was definitely lacking compared to the 2016-2017 Warriors, and they did have some injuries this season and stuff like that, so definitely a sub-GOAT championship team, which is obviously still amazing. They're one of the best teams in this list, but not top tier like the 2016-2017 version. Now for the final team on this list, the 2015-2016 Cleveland Cavaliers. They're coming back from 3-1, almost as good as the Nuggets 2 3-1s. But it was in the finals, so props to them, but ultra high tier championship teams. This team was insane. I don't want to say insane, but it was a very good team, ultra high tier championship team in my opinion. Obviously that's why they're there, but this team is nothing special inside the regular season. 6.4 net rating, but they did play very good inside the playoffs with a 9.5 net rating inside the playoffs. They went 16-5. This team didn't have very good depth, but they did have a pretty good starting lineup, and they really weren't obviously as good as that Warriors team, but they were more clutch, and that's why they won the NBA championship, and that is why they're on here. Alright, so here is the updated list for part 2 of this little series I did. If you want to see a part 3 with maybe the rest of the championship teams, the ones that'll probably be below most of these teams, let me know down in the comments, but please the algorithm hates small YouTubers like me, so yeah, please leave a like, please subscribe, obliterate that like button like I said, but thank you buddies, and I'll see y'all in the next one.